Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome to the deep dive. We're digging into some listener-provided material today, focusing on a topic that's, well, generating quite a bit of discussion.
That's right. Our goal, as always, is to take these sources you provide and really unpack them, aiming for a clear understanding efficiently.
And the focus for this deep dive, it's an examination of potential parallels between George Orwell's 1984 and certain developments here in the United States.
Specifically, developments under the second administration of President Donald J. Trump, so everything happening after January 20th, 2025.
And we should be clear, we're not just using 1984 as some kind of loose metaphor.
No, not at all. The idea is
Oh.
to use it as a direct point of comparison. We're looking at very specific mechanisms of control that Orwell described in the novel.
And then seeing if there are, potential echoes or reflections of those mechanisms in current events. It's a framework for analysis, really.
Exactly. And we've identified 7 core mechanisms from the novel that we'll explore today.
Okay, let's list them out for everyone.
First, there's the collapse of truth, which Orwell called reality control. Second is doublethink.
Third, shifting alliances and the creation of invented enemies.
Fourth, the concept of disappearing individuals. Vaporization is the term used in the book, where people become unpersons.
Then fifth, arresting political opponents or thought crime.
Sixth is language manipulation. Newspeak. And finally, seventh, surveillance and loyalty enforcement.
Right. Now, before we dive into those parallels, maybe a quick refresher on 1984 itself for anyone who hasn't read it recently or perhaps even at all.
Good idea. So, 1984 paints this picture of a really grim dystopian future. It's set in a superstate called Oceania.
And life there is defined by perpetual war with one of 2 other superstates and just constant, pervasive surveillance by the ruling party and its leader, Big Brother.
The main character, Winston Smith, he works in something called the Ministry of Truth. His job is literally rewriting historical records to match whatever the party needs the past to be at that moment.
Society is incredibly rigid. You have the elite inner party at the top, then the outer party, which is where Winston is, and then the vast majority, the proles, who are largely left to their own devices but kept ignorant.
And the party stays in power through intense psychological manipulation. That constant surveillance, we mentioned things like telescreens that watch and listen, informants everywhere, and crushing any hint of individuality or dissent.
And those ministries you mentioned, they're quite ironic, aren't they?
Absolutely. The Ministry of Truth deals in lies and propaganda. The Ministry of Peace wages war. The Ministry of Love is where they torture and re-educate people. And the Ministry of Plenty oversees an economy of deliberate scarcity.
It's all geared towards one thing then.
Total, absolute control. And these 7 mechanisms we're about to discuss are how they achieve and maintain that control in Orwell's world.
Okay, let's start with the first one, the collapse of truth or reality control. This feels pretty foundational in the book.
It absolutely is. There's that famous party slogan, who controls the past, controls the future, who controls the present, controls the past.
Meaning objective reality, facts. They just don't matter as much as what the party declares to be true.
Exactly. Truth is subordinate. Whatever the party says is. And we can look at certain economic narratives from the Trump administration since January 2025 as a potential area to examine this.
You mean regarding the tariffs?
Precisely.
Yeah.
You had the imposition of significant tariffs, and observable economic indicators started pointing towards negative consequences. Things like, well, plummeting consumer confidence, stock markets reacting poorly, investors getting nervous.
And forecasts predicting lower household income, even a higher chance of recession.
Right. All that data was coming out. Yet the administration consistently pushed a narrative of positive outcomes. President Trump spoke about the tariffs leading to something beautiful.
So asserting a reality that seemed to contradict the observable data.
That's the potential parallel. An insistence on their interpretation over the evidence, which sort of echoes the party demanding belief in its pronouncements, regardless of what one might see or experience. It makes you question how much you can trust the data being presented.
And there was that specific incident on April 10th, 2025.
Yes, that was quite striking. President Trump posts on social media, in all caps, "This is a great time to buy DJT."
And then just a few hours later.
Within 4 hours, yes, there's an announcement of a 90-day pause on nearly all tariffs, and the stock market surged immediately afterwards.
The timing certainly raised eyebrows.
It did. He had invited questions about, well, potential market manipulation. Was inside information being leveraged? The president's explanation about when the decision was actually finalized was, let's say, ambiguous.
So the act of declaring it a great time to buy right before news that would likely boost the market.
Could be seen as an attempt to shape that reality, to make it true by declaration, echoing the party's power to define reality in 1984. It potentially undermines market fairness, if true.
There's also a more fundamental example, perhaps, in that executive order from January 20th, 2025.
Ah, yes, the one defining federal policy on sex.
Right. Declaring sex as strictly binary male or female, based only on biology at birth, and mandating the removal of terms like gender identity, transgender, non-binary from federal policies.
This is a direct attempt to control the framework of reality by manipulating foundational language. It imposes a specific, rigid definition that ignores scientific consensus and lived experience for many.
So, using the power of the state to define something so basic about human identity.
It very much resembles the party's control over reality, dictating fundamental truths by decree. It limits how these concepts can even be discussed or acknowledged within government structures, potentially impacting rights and recognition.
This seems to lead naturally into the next mechanism, doublethink.
It does. Orwell's definition is crucial here. Doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them.
It's not just hypocrisy, is it? It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It's about mental discipline. The ability to know you're manipulating reality, but believe your own truthfulness at the same time. It's how you accept the party's constant shifts. Think of those slogans. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.
Pure contradiction, accepted as truth. So where might we see echoes of requiring that kind of mental juggling act now?
Well, one area to consider is the administration's policy towards Russia since the start of the term.
Okay. There's been a stated effort to reset relations, right? Bilateral talks, reopening dialogue channels.
Yes, and alongside that, what appears to be a softening on issues like countering Russian disinformation or enforcing sanctions evasion measures.
Which contrasts pretty sharply with decades of U.S. foreign policy and certainly traditional Republican views on Russia.
Absolutely. But at the same time, you have President Trump publicly calling out specific Russian actions. For instance, urging President Putin to stop after a missile attack in Kiev.
So a push for better relations, but also condemnation.
And then add another layer. The suggestions that Ukraine needs to make difficult concessions. This is widely interpreted as meaning giving up territory and dropping its NATO ambitions.
Which aligns with Russia's own stated goals.
Exactly. So observers are sort of asked to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously. Russia as a potential partner and as an aggressor. Questioning alliances like NATO while considering demands that benefit Russia, it requires a kind of doublethink.
And there was that comment about Putin not taking all of Ukraine being a pretty big concession.
That's a powerful example, isn't it? To accept that, you first have to accept the premise that the initial aggression is somehow normal, or the baseline. Then stopping short of the maximum goal becomes a concession. It requires twisting logic, accepting contradictory starting points.
We see a similar need for perhaps holding contradictory thoughts with economic policy, too.
I think so. You hear the pronouncements. These tariffs will create jobs, pay down debt, strengthen trade, lead to a golden age.
But then you look at the economic analyses, the market reactions.
And they project, as we discussed, reduced income, recession risk, higher costs, volatility. So, to accept the administration's narrative, you have to believe that policies causing observable economic strain are actually beneficial.
Present harm will lead to future good, despite evidence.
Essentially, you have to hold both ideas. This is hurting now, according to the data, and this will be great for us later, according to the pronouncements. It's akin to accepting war is peace or ignorance is strength, believing the slogan over the evidence.
Okay, let's move to the third mechanism, shifting alliances and perpetual war. In 1984, Oceania is always at war, but the enemy changes abruptly.
Yes. One day they're fighting Eurasia, allied with Eastasia. The next day, suddenly, they've always been at war with Eastasia, and Eurasia is the ally, and the population just accepts it.
Orwell wrote, Oceania was at war with Eurasia. Therefore, Oceania had always been at war with Eurasia. The past is completely rewritten.
It's a powerful tool for control. It demands total mental submission. If you can make people instantly switch allegiances and hatreds and forget history, you have immense power.
So, looking at U.S. foreign policy since January 2025, how might this apply? We already touched on Russia.
Right. That reset with Russia, the talks, normalizing ties, the reported work on a Ukraine peace deal, the softening on disinformation and sanctions task forces.
That's the shift towards a former adversary.
Exactly. A major departure from the post-Cold War norm and traditional GOP stances. But then look at the other side of the coin. Relations with long-standing NATO allies.
Reports suggest friction there.
Significant friction, according to the sources. A sense that the U.S. might be undermining its commitment to the alliance, creating rifts with key European partners. It seems to fit a pattern of moving away from traditional alliances, maybe seeing them as more transactional.
And concerning Ukraine specifically?
There were those reported suggestions that NATO membership was unrealistic for Ukraine, that they needed to make difficult concessions again, likely meaning territory.
And President Trump reportedly hesitated to call Russia the aggressor, even suggested Ukraine might have started it.
Yes. Those reports caused significant concern among allies. And it culminated reportedly in the U.S. voting with Russia and against European allies on some UN resolutions about the conflict.
So you have this simultaneous warming towards Russia and cooling towards NATO allies.
It requires a real cognitive adjustment, doesn't it? You're asked to see Russia, long viewed as an adversary, as a peace partner whose demands are negotiable. And traditional allies, the bedrock of U.S. security for generations, are treated differently, perhaps viewed with more skepticism.
It's like needing to mentally erase past relationships and threat assessments.
It demands that kind of flexibility, that cognitive submission, very much like the citizens of Oceania having to instantly switch who the enemy is. It could really challenge the stability of international relations.
Let's turn to the fourth mechanism, disappearing individuals, or vaporization. This is one of the most chilling aspects of the book.
It really is. Orwell describes how people just vanish. Your name was removed from the registers. Every record of everything you had ever done was wiped out. You were abolished, annihilated. Vaporized was the usual word. They become unpersons.
Erased, without process.
Now, obviously, the U.S. isn't Oceania. There aren't state-sponsored disappearances in that literal sense. But some aspects of immigration enforcement since January 2025, according to the sources, seem to echo this idea of rapid extra-procedural removal.
The administration did vow the largest domestic deportation operation in American history.
And several actions seem aimed at that. The Laken-Riley Act, mandating detention for non-citizens arrested for certain crimes, is one piece. But more striking is the reported use of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798.
An act from, well, 1798, usually for wartime.
Exactly. Extremely old, typically reserved for declared wars. But it was reportedly invoked to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador, apparently with very limited due process, even allegedly defying a court order at one point.
And using military flights for deportations, resisting court orders about wrongly deported people.
These actions, taken together, particularly using that old law, could suggest a mechanism for removing people very quickly, potentially bypassing standard legal reviews. They effectively disappear from the U.S. system. It raises serious due process questions.
And wasn't there also a change regarding sensitive locations?
Yes. A directive from January 21st, 2025 reportedly ended the policy that limited enforcement actions near places like schools, hospitals, places of worship.
So no more safe zones.
Effectively, yes. This reported change broadens the reach of enforcement dramatically. We heard reports of parents being afraid to send their kids to school. The threat of apprehension, of removal, of potentially disappearing from their community now extends into almost every aspect of daily life for undocumented individuals. It mirrors that pervasive reach of the party's control.
Okay, mechanism number 5, arresting political opponents, or thought crime.
In 1984, thought itself, if it's unorthodox, is the crime. Orwell said, thought crime does not entail death. Thought crime is death. The goal is to eliminate even the possibility of dissent.
Now, the U.S. has legal protections for political dissent, obviously. But are there actions since January 2025 that might suggest using state power against opponents in ways that perhaps approach this idea?
Some interpretations of events could point that way. Take the executive order directing the Department of Justice to investigate Act Blue.
The main fundraising platform for Democrats.
Yes, and the investigation was reportedly prompted by allegations from Republicans.
So targeting the opposition's funding mechanism based on claims by rivals.
One could interpret it that way. Regardless of the investigation's eventual outcome, the act of targeting such a core piece of the opposition's infrastructure could be seen as an attempt to disrupt or weaken them, potentially chilling political participation. It resembles, in principle, the party neutralizing potential dissent sources.
What about individuals, former officials who became critics?
There are reported examples there, too. In April 2025, President Trump reportedly signed memos stripping security clearances from Chris Krebs and Miles Taylor. and ordered DOJ investigations into them.
Krebs ran cybersecurity and contradicted Trump on the 2020 election. Taylor was a former DHS official who wrote critically about Trump.
Right. And Trump reportedly used language like traitor and suggested treason regarding Taylor, accused Krebs of weaponizing the federal government.
Framing criticism as treasonous.
When dissent, especially about something like election integrity or fitness for office, is framed in those terms as betrayal, it could seem to justify using state power, like investigations or stripping clearances, against those critics. It starts to feel a bit like thought crime, where holding the wrong view becomes punishable.
This feels connected to the sixth mechanism, language as a weapon or newspeak.
Definitely. Newspeak wasn't just censorship. It was about fundamentally limiting thought by eliminating the words needed to express dissenting ideas. Orwell. Don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it.
Making unorthodoxy literally unthinkable.
Precisely. Now, we don't have an actual Newspeak dictionary, but the strategic use of language by the administration since January 2025, the simplification, the euphemisms, the repetition, seems to echo those principles.
How so? Give us some examples.
Well, look at how potentially controversial policies are framed. The Schedule F idea, which could make it easier to fire certain federal employees, is presented as promoting accountability.
Making it sound positive, obscuring the potential for political purging.
Potentially. Or tough immigration screening becomes extreme vetting. Border actions are securing our borders. The Russia initiative is a reset.
Yeah.
These terms tend to be simple, often positive sounding, possibly downplaying complexities or negative impacts.
Like Newspeak replacing nuanced words with approved, simpler ones.
It has that flavor, yes. Shaping perception by controlling the vocabulary. And then there's the sheer repetition of certain phrases and accusations.
Like the RNC chair calling Act Blue a dark money scam.
Or President Trump continuing to insist the 2020 election was rigged.
These act like slogans.
They can function that way, yeah. Easy to repeat, easy to internalize. They can short-circuit critical thinking and just reinforce a particular narrative. By constantly repeating them, the aim might be to make them accepted facts, narrowing the space for debate, much like Newspeak aimed to narrow the range of thought itself.
Okay, the seventh and final mechanism, surveillance and loyalty enforcement.
In 1984, this is constant. Telescreens watching, informants listening, and absolute loyalty to the party and Big Brother is demanded above all else. Orwell wrote, "There will be no loyalty except loyalty toward the party. There will be no love except the love of Big Brother."
Ensuring not just obedience, but inner conformity.
Yes, that's vital for the party's control. Looking at the current situation, actions concerning the federal workforce and immigration screening since January 2025 could suggest an increased focus on loyalty and state scrutiny.
The proposed schedule policy career category for federal employees.
That's a key reported example.
Yeah.
It could potentially affect tens of thousands of career employees in policy roles, making them easier to remove for, quote, subversion of presidential directives.
So easier to fire if they're not seen as aligned with the president's agenda.
That's the concern. Framed as accountability, but it could become a tool to enforce political loyalty, potentially prioritizing that loyalty over objective expertise or advice. It echoes the party's demand for unwavering fealty from its members.
And on the surveillance side, enhanced vetting.
We've reportedly seen that too, especially for non-citizens. That executive order mandating enhanced immigration screening, reviewing visa policies. Reports mention increased requests for information, even biometrics for work visas.
And international students having visas revoked.
Yes, significant numbers reported. While presented as security, these actions increase state scrutiny and data collection on certain groups. It contributes to an environment where people might feel watched, where adverse action could happen based on perceived risk or lack of compliance, reflecting that pervasive watchfulness in 1984.
So we've walked through all 7 mechanisms: reality control, doublethink, shifting alliances, vaporization, thought crime, newspeak, and surveillance loyalty. And we've looked at potential parallels post-January 2025 based on our source material.
We've considered instances like official narratives diverging from data, the apparent need to hold contradictory ideas, the shifts in foreign relations, policies impacting immigrant communities, actions against critics, strategic language use, and measures affecting federal workers and visa holders.
And it's crucial to see how these mechanisms often work together, right? They're interconnected.
Absolutely. As Orwell showed, and as the potential parallels suggest. Manipulating language, like using Newspeak-style euphemisms, makes doublethink easier. Controlling reality justifies targeting opponents or shifting alliances, and surveillance underpins loyalty enforcement and perhaps enables the marginalization, the vaporization of certain groups. They reinforce each other.
Orwell's ending for Winston Smith is so bleak, his complete submission, those final lines.
He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. It's utterly chilling.
And O'Brien's vision for the party's future.
Equally stark. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever, a brutal image of perpetual oppression.
So this deep dive, drawing on the sources provided, serves as a kind of record, mapping these potential parallels through that Orwellian lens.
It leaves us, and you, the listener, with some heavy things to think about. What are the potential implications if these trends, these observed parallels, continue or intensify? What does it mean for the relationship between state power, the concept of truth, and ultimately individual autonomy in our society today?
A lot to reflect on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.